The Middle East is a region shaped by centuries of history, religion, politics, and conflict. It is home to ancient civilizations, sacred sites, and powerful nations whose interests often collide. Over the past 100 years, this region has experienced repeated wars and political upheaval. At the center of many of these conflicts is the dispute between the State of Israel and the Palestinian people. But the conflict has never been limited to just two sides. Over time, many other countries and organizations became involved. Regional powers such as Iran have supported various groups opposing Israel, while Western nations such as the United States have been key allies of Israel. These alliances and rivalries have created a delicate balance of power. For years, tensions simmered beneath the surface. But in 2023, a dramatic event ignited a war that would reshape the entire region. On October 7, 2023, fighters from Hamas launched a large-scale surprise attack on Israel from the Gaza Strip. Thousands of rockets were fired toward Israeli cities. At the same time, militants crossed the border and attacked Israeli towns and military bases. The attacks shocked the country. Hundreds of civilians were killed, and many others were taken hostage and brought back into Gaza. For Israel, the event was one of the most devastating attacks in its modern history. Within hours, the Israeli government declared war on Hamas. The military mobilized rapidly. Airstrikes began almost immediately. What had been a long-running conflict suddenly became a full-scale war. After the October attack, Israel launched a massive military campaign in the Gaza Strip. Airstrikes targeted Hamas infrastructure, weapons depots, and command centers. The Israeli military said its goal was to dismantle Hamas's military capabilities and secure the release of hostages. Weeks later, Israeli ground forces entered Gaza. Urban warfare began in densely populated areas. Cities such as Gaza City became major battlegrounds. The fighting was intense and destructive. Buildings collapsed, neighborhoods were reduced to rubble, and infrastructure was severely damaged. As the war expanded, civilians on both sides faced immense fear and uncertainty. The conflict quickly created a humanitarian crisis inside the Gaza Strip. Electricity supplies were disrupted. Hospitals struggled to operate. Food and water became increasingly scarce. Hundreds of thousands of civilians were displaced as families fled areas of heavy fighting. International aid organizations warned that the humanitarian situation was deteriorating rapidly. Images of destruction spread across the world through news broadcasts and social media. Global attention turned to the conflict. Many governments began calling for ceasefires and humanitarian pauses. But the fighting continued. Only one day after the Gaza war began, another front opened in the conflict. The Lebanese militant group Hezbollah began firing rockets toward northern Israel. Hezbollah is based in Lebanon and is widely considered one of the most powerful non-state military groups in the world. The organization has tens of thousands of rockets and missiles. Its leadership declared support for Hamas. Israel responded with artillery and airstrikes along the border. The fighting between Israel and Hezbollah did not immediately become a full-scale war. But it created a constant threat along Israel's northern border. For the first time, the Gaza conflict began spreading beyond its original battlefield. Behind many of these developments stood another powerful country, Iran. For decades, Iran has been one of Israel's strongest regional rivals. Iran has supported groups such as Hamas and Hezbollah financially, politically, and militarily. Iranian leaders have long criticized Israel's policies toward Palestinians. Meanwhile, Israel has viewed Iran's nuclear program as a major security threat. Over the years, the two countries engaged in covert operations, cyber warfare, and occasional military strikes through proxies. Although Iran was not directly fighting Israel in the early stages of the Gaza war, its influence was deeply connected to the conflict. As the months passed, the possibility of direct confrontation between Israel and Iran began to grow. Throughout late 2023 and early 2024, tensions continued to rise across the Middle East. Armed groups aligned with Iran began launching attacks in several countries. Some attacks targeted American military bases in Iraq and Syria. Others targeted shipping lanes in the Red Sea near Yemen. These attacks were often carried out by smaller groups allied with Iran. While each incident was limited in scope, together they created a pattern of escalating confrontation. Military analysts began warning that the Gaza war might evolve into a broader regional conflict. In April 2024, the conflict entered a new and dangerous phase. After an Israeli strike on an Iranian diplomatic facility in Syria, Iran launched a massive missile and drone attack against Israel. Hundreds of projectiles were launched across the region. Many were intercepted by Israeli air defenses and by systems operated by allied countries. Still, the attack marked a historic moment. It was one of the first times Iran had directly launched such a large strike toward Israel. Although the damage was limited, the political and military implications were enormous. The rivalry between Israel and Iran was now becoming more direct. As tensions grew, Hezbollah increased its attacks along the Israel-Lebanon border. Rocket fire, artillery exchanges, and airstrikes became frequent. Israeli communities near the border were evacuated. In Lebanon, villages close to the frontier also experienced displacement. Both sides appeared to avoid launching a full-scale invasion. But the risk of escalation remained constant. Military analysts warned that a major war between Israel and Hezbollah could be far more destructive than previous conflicts. Inside Gaza, the war entered a prolonged phase of intense urban combat. Israeli forces moved deeper into major cities. Battles took place in Gaza City, Khan Yunis, and other urban centers. Hamas fighters used tunnels, fortified buildings, and ambush tactics. The Israeli military relied heavily on air power and armored units. The fighting was slow and difficult. Urban warfare is one of the most complex forms of combat. Every street, building, and tunnel could become a battlefield. Months passed with no quick resolution. As the war dragged on, international reactions became increasingly intense. Some countries strongly supported Israel's right to defend itself. Others criticized the scale of military operations in Gaza. The conflict became one of the most debated political issues in the world. The United Nations held multiple emergency meetings. Diplomats attempted to negotiate ceasefires. But achieving a lasting agreement proved extremely difficult. The war continued. One of the most significant global effects of the war occurred far from Gaza. Armed groups began targeting ships passing through the Red Sea and nearby waters. These shipping routes are some of the most important in the world. They connect Europe, Asia, and the Middle East. Disruptions to these routes threatened global trade and energy supplies. Several countries deployed naval forces to protect commercial ships. The conflict was now affecting international commerce and the global economy. One of the most emotionally charged aspects of the war involved hostages taken during the October 2023 attacks. Families of hostages organized protests and public campaigns demanding their return. Negotiations were held through intermediaries. At times, temporary ceasefires allowed for limited hostage exchanges. But many hostages remained in captivity for long periods. The issue became central to political debates inside Israel. As the war continued, political pressure grew within Israel itself. Some citizens supported continuing military operations until Hamas was completely dismantled. Others argued for negotiations and hostage deals. Public protests occasionally erupted. Debates about the future of Gaza intensified. The war was no longer only a military conflict. It had become a major political issue inside Israel. Meanwhile, Iran faced its own complex decisions. Iran supported several groups opposing Israel. But direct war with Israel and the United States carried enormous risks. Iran's leaders attempted to balance support for allied groups while avoiding a direct large-scale war. Still, tensions kept rising. Each military strike increased the chances of escalation. By early 2026, tensions across the Middle East were extremely high. Military forces across the region were on alert. Airstrikes and retaliatory attacks continued. At times, the situation seemed close to spiraling into a wider regional war. International leaders warned that the conflict could destabilize the entire Middle East. During this period, Hezbollah expanded its attacks against Israel. Missiles and drones targeted Israeli military positions. Israel responded with large airstrikes in Lebanon. Cities and towns near the border experienced growing destruction. The northern front was becoming increasingly dangerous. By this stage, the Middle East conflict involved multiple fronts. The Gaza war continued. Israel and Hezbollah exchanged attacks. Iran-aligned groups operated across several countries. And international powers were closely involved. Analysts warned that the region was facing one of its most dangerous geopolitical moments in decades. Military forces across the Middle East increased their readiness levels. Air defense systems were activated in multiple countries. Diplomatic channels worked urgently to prevent further escalation. The situation remained volatile. At any moment, a single event could trigger a much larger war. Today, the Middle East remains in a period of deep uncertainty. The war that began with the October 7th attacks has evolved into a complex regional crisis. Millions of people across the region have been affected. Cities have been destroyed. Families have been displaced. And political tensions remain extremely high. What happens next remains unknown. History shows that conflicts in this region rarely have simple endings. But understanding how the war began helps explain the fragile and dangerous situation the Middle East faces today.